Hi, everybody. We're back with another play of the day. And today we are moving into a really important movement of theater, which is realism. Um, Realism is so important that it's kind of how we view everything today, which is problematic when you get to things like trying to direct the Greeks realistically or discuss musical theater through a concept of realism because they're not written to be realistic. So, realism is all about representing things as they actually are. Your characters shouldn't go into long poetic soliloquies like they did in Shakespeare, for example, because people don't really do that. Your characters shouldn't speak in poetry, period. Your characters should be trying to capture the essence of real speech. And in doing that is when you get into playwright voice, which is how does each person as a writer perceive that people communicate? Because you get into someone like David Mamet, where characters can barely get a sentence out before they're cut off by someone else. Or you get into someone like Neil LaBute, whose characters have kind of a Mamet-esque essence, but don't cut each other off all of the time. They just don't listen to each other. Um, and then you get into someone like Harold Pinter, and it's full of awkward pauses and moments where the characters are thinking before they speak. And then what they say can just be a tiny representation of that thought. But they're all striving to create a sense of realism with the way that their characters interact and the way that their characters behave. We're looking today actually at A Doll's House by Ibsen, which is a bit of an offshoot of realism, which is called naturalism. And naturalism is all about everything occurs according to science, according to human behavior. There is no outside fate, there is no outside influences of any kind. It's saying we are products of the world that we live in and our environment. So naturalism goes very much into the world in which the characters live. So we are looking at 1879 Norway gender politics. Yay! The story of A Doll's House centers around a woman named Nora Helmer. She is married to a man named Torvald Helmer. They've been married for a while. They have two kids, a son and a daughter, whose only job is to be cute and sweet and run in and be like, "Mommy, mommy." And she's like, "Oh, my little children." That's pretty much all they do, and that's why they don't have names. Um, so years ago, Torvald, who lives in Norway, got very, very sick. So sick, he was gonna die because of the weather in Norway, where it's like dark and cold. So Nora said, the doctor thinks we should go somewhere warmer. Why don't we go spend time in Italy? But Torvald is a banker and he's pretty stingy with his money, actually. So he said, no, no, I'll be fine. And then she comes back and she's like, I don't agree with you. And I talked to my father, and my father gave me money, and we are going to go to Italy. And he's like, fine, I guess I'll live. So she saves his life and takes him to Italy for a while, and he gets better. And they've come back to Norway, and he works in this bank, and he has just gotten a promotion. And at the beginning of the show, it's Christmas time, and she's so happy because last year she had to make all these little handmade gifts because they didn't have much money. But now he got his promotion, and so now she's feeling like she's, living large. And she bought all these presents, and she's very excited and life is good. And her husband comes home and he's like, I like my job. It's a good job. But there's this guy there, and his name is Krogstad. Like, I don't know if you remember, like, I went to school with him, and he's like morally diseased. He's a horrible person. And she's like, well, what did he do? And it's like, he committed forgery. And bankers can't just commit forgery. And he's an awful person, so I'm going to fire him. And she says, oh, well, you're the banker, so whatever you think is best, dear. Some people come over. There is Mrs. Lind, who has been Nora's longtime friend, and Mrs. Lind got married a few years ago. Her father had died, and she was having to support her mother and her younger siblings, and so she got married so that she would have the money. And she her husband died recently. So now she has no money and she doesn't have a job because women couldn't have jobs at this time. Except if your husband died, now you could get a job. But if your husband was alive, you just stayed home and looked pretty and made the food and had the babies. That was your job. So Mrs. Lind has come because she heard that Torvald got this promotion, and she's like, I need a job. I want to talk to him about hiring me in the bank. And Nora says, oh, that's a wonderful idea. And she's like, how are you? And Mrs. Lind is like, well, I'm really sad. I'm very lonely. I have no one to love. It's very hard to be a single woman. And Nora's like, yeah, I get that. Why don't we go talk to Torvald? Also coming over is Krogstad, the morally corrupt one who forged a signature. And Torvald is in the study talking to Krogstad. And as they come out, Nora says, oh, Torvald, dear, why don't you talk to Ms. Lind? She's looking for a job. And he's like, well, that's convenient because I just fired Mr. Krogstad. I have a job. Come talk to me, Ms. Lind. And Nora's there and she's decorating the Christmas tree and la da 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 da. And she realizes Krogstad hasn't left. And he says, Nora, I need for you to convince your husband to hire me back. I have a wife, I have kids, I need to support them. And she's like, well, I'm just a woman and I don't make bank choices. So I can't do that. And he's like, well, you do work with banks though. And she's like, nope, I'm just the wife. And he's like, but years ago when you went to Italy, you took out a loan from our bank. And she's like, well, I wanted for my father to help us, but he didn't have the money to help us. And I've been paying it back. I just had my father sign for me. And he's like, yeah, that's interesting. I was looking into that. And you're right. You have been paying it back slowly because she takes a little bit of money out of her allowance because, she's a child. So she's been paying it back very slowly from her allowance. He's like, yeah, you've been doing that. But the day that you gave us the loan application signed by your father, you couldn't possibly have known this because he lives a long way off and, no telephones or anything. But your father died the day before. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, he dated it the day after he died. So either he's a ghost or I'm not the only forger in the room. Well, this bad. This real bad. Because he says, so I need for you to tell your husband that he's going to give me my job back. And if he doesn't, I'll tell your husband that you also committed this crime and I will blackmail you for it. Because there's no way he can keep his job if he's married to someone who, a woman who like went against the bank and broke the law. So she's got really high stakes now. She talks to Torvald again when Mrs. Lind gets her job, and she's like, "Oh, this is wonderful! I have a job now." And Nora's like, couldn't they both have jobs? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" And he's like, "Nope, he's awful. I've never liked Krogstad. I never liked working with Krogstad, and I'm certainly not going to supervise him. He is fired." There is another character. His name is Dr. Rank. He is an older character who is a dear friend of their family. He's an interesting one because he's of an older generation, and so he's very much like inappropriate with the ladies. And he has always been in love with Nora. And now that he's really old and about to die, he has decided it's time to tell her. And he tells her by giving her silk stockings, which we're talking about a time period where you weren't allowed to see women's ankles, much less like see their silk stockings. So it's a little stalkery to be giving these stockings. And Dr. Rink admits that he's in love with her, and Nora's like, "Oh, well, I am in love with Torvald, but I love you as a friend." So Dr. Rink gets friend zoned. And he's a little upset about that, but he knows he's going to die either way. He just wanted for her to know the truth. Nora continues to try to convince Torvald, but she can't do it. So Krogstad comes back, and he's like, "So, I don't have my job back, and that's a problem for me, and now a problem for you, because I have written out everything that you did and have made a detailed letter, and I've put it in the mailbox outside, which is locked, and you're a woman, and so you can't get to it." So Nora has this whole scene where she's just watching this mailbox through the window and trying to figure out how to get into it, because she knows that her fate is in that mailbox. And Torvald comes in and he's like, "I'm just going to go get the mail." And she's like, No. We have a big party coming up. And I was going to do a dance, but I'm horrible at it. And she shows him, and it's this horrible dance. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm not getting the mail. I'm going to help you learn how to dance, young lady." And she's like, "Oh, thank you." Because her whole thing is that she plays into how he has cast her in his mind, right? Like, he always calls her my little darling and my little bird, and she'll like sit on his lap and kick her feet and do all the things so that she can have this life with now pretty good money and her kids and everything. He helps her learn how to dance. They go to this party, and they get back from the party, and they're, a little tipsy, and they've had a really good time. And she's like, "Okay, well, it's time for us to go to bed." And he's like, "No, I forgot to get the mail earlier." And she's like, "I'll get the mail." And he's like, "Why would you get the mail? You never get the mail. You're a woman." So she goes, "Well, just give me the key and I'll go to." "You're tired." And he's like, "No, I'm getting the mail." So he goes outside, and she is contemplating suicide. Like, she is ready to kill herself to like save the honor of her family. And Torvald comes back in, and he has the letter. And he's like, "Nora, what is this?" And she's like, "Okay, listen. So you were really, really sick. And I didn't want for you to die because I love you so much. Don't you see? I did this because I love you." And he's like, "You broke the law. You've ruined our reputation. And now I'm going to forever be in the debt of Krogstad, who I hate." Meanwhile, Krogstad has had a conversation with Mrs. Lind. They used to love each other when they were young. And Mrs. Lind, because her father died, she had to marry for money. She couldn't be with Krogstad. But now she talks to him and she's like, "You look good." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm married." And she's like, "I know, you look good." And his heart softens. And he's like, "Oh my God, what have I turned into? I became this really upset man because you abandoned me. And I've been unhappy and I've made everyone unhappy. So I have to fix this." And Mrs. Lind is like, their marriage will be better when Torvald knows the truth. So just let it play itself out. And Krogstad says, "No, it's horrible. I've got to fix this." So as Torvald is seeing this letter and he's saying, "You betrayed me," he's like, "We're not married anymore. We're married, but only for appearances. Like, we'll sleep in separate rooms. I I can't stand to look at you." And all of a sudden the maid comes running in and she's like, "Oh, sir, we got another letter." And he opens it and it's Krogstad saying, "You know what? I release you. You're not going to be blackmailed. I was making a horrible choice. And quite frankly, blackmail's a bad color on me. So you can go. Don't worry about it." And Torvald's like, "Oh, oh, it worked itself out. Nora, I forgive you." And Nora goes to her room and comes out with a suitcase. And he's like, "Where do you think you're going?" And she's like, "I'm leaving you, Torvald." And he's like, "Why? Everything worked out. It can go back to being like normal. Like, this is exactly how we would have hoped it worked out. There's no harm, no foul." And she's like, "Not to you. But you just showed me the man I'm married to, and it's not who I thought I was married to." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "I knew what was in that letter, and I hoped that you would read it, see what I had done for you, see that for the last few years I have sacrificed and like cut corners on finances so that I could pay it back and we wouldn't be in trouble. I thought that you would see past the stupid rules that hold women back and allow me to have loved you that much. I thought you would take me by the hand and stand up to Krogstad and say, 'Yes, my wife did this.' And then he would have no power." And Torvald says, "You mean you expect me to like sacrifice honor for love?" And Nora says, "Millions of women do it every day." Oh, Nora. So he's like, you can't leave. I mean, where would you go?" And she's like, "I don't know. But I've been playing this part as this little doll for you." That's why they call it that. "This little doll for you. And I need to become a woman. I need to go out into the world and I need to like see what I can be." And he's like, "Please don't go. What about the kids?" She's like, "I'm sure they will be better with someone who's an adult." Which is handy because they do have a maid named Anne Marie who is actually their nurse that's already pretty much raising the kids. Like, she raised Nora, now she's raising the kids. So Nora's like, "They'll be better with Anne Marie. She's a better mother than I am anyway." And he's like, "But Nora, you can't." And she says, "I'm sorry, but I have to." And the last thing you hear is the door slamming as she leaves. And it's called The Door Slam heard around the world because this play had protests and there were places that wouldn't do it. Ibsen had to write a second ending for Germany because his German agent was like, "We're not going to do this." And he's like, uh, "Well, why not?" And they're like, "Because she can't leave." And so he had to write a different one where she's leaving and she actually sees her kids and breaks down crying and stays. And Ibsen hated it. He was like, it ruined my play. But I mean, all for like getting those marks, right? So, yeah, it's a crazy play about women's like autonomy and women's ability to have agency for themselves, written at a time that women were like corseted up and just really possessions of men. And so it's a great play. Throughout this unit, we're going to look at a few more pieces of realism, including 1948's 12 Angry Men and The Cherry Orchard by Anton Chekhov. And I'm not sure what we're going to do for the fourth one. We might get into some Tennessee Williams in there. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it.